Hello.
Welcome back to the Space Gulag. Today we'll find out what would have happened had Anakin never burned on Mustafar. Before we begin, special thanks to all of our patrons. If you want to support me in other ways, all the links are listed down below. Otherwise,
our story begins at the end of a duel between two heroes. Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi had just defeated his student Anakin Skywalker on the fiery world of Mustafar.
Obi-Wan stood on a hill overlooking his fallen apprentice. He was so heartbroken. He didn't know how to handle what he had just seen. It shattered everything within him. He had just removed the remaining limbs that Anakin had, and got rid of the other arm and both legs of Anakin Skywalker. Anakin was laying at the bottom of the lava river, looking up. He screamed at Obi-Wan, though Obi-Wan knew what needed to be done. He held his lightsaber and looked down at his student. He needed to kill him. Anakin wasn't on fire, and he would likely rise from the ashes of Mustafar and do worse things to the galaxy. Obi-Wan took a deep breath, and then he felt the darkness rising around him. He looked down to the lava banks where his student was laying, and then he saw a shadow cascade across the surface of Mustafar. Obi-Wan knew he couldn't fight Sidious at this moment, especially considering the fact that it was Sidious who likely defeated Master Yoda and probably killed him. Kenobi used the Force and picked up Skywalker's lightsaber before running away, back to the ship he arrived in. More than anything, he needed to make sure that Padme was safe. If Padme wasn't here, Obi-Wan would have tried to kill Anakin and then gone to fight Sidious. But right now the most important thing was to make sure Padme and the baby would be alright. When Obi-Wan got back to the ship, he saw Palpatine walking out of his shuttle. Sidious looked over and saw Kenobi, dispatching his troops to shoot down the vessel, while he and another duo of troopers searched for Skywalker. Obi-Wan pulled the ship off the planet as a crew of clone troopers shot at the vessel. Obi-Wan departed into hyperspace towards Polis Massa, where he and Master Yoda had agreed to meet up. Sidious, on the other hand, found Skywalker climbing up the side of the lava bank. Sidious walked down to the side of the bank and knelt down next to him and told him that he was a failure. Anakin looked up at Sidious with a mildly concerning look on his face as Sidious reiterated what he had just said.
It's a shame, Lord Vader, that you were bested by Kenobi.
Anakin looked up at Sidious, groaning in pain. His eyes were golden, and he was filled with rage. Sidious knelt down and looked Anakin dead in the eye, and told him that to embrace the dark side would have won him the battle. To lose showed that he wasn't all he believed to be. Sidious continued telling Anakin that he failed himself, and even more so, he failed his wife. Anakin's eyes lit with rage, but this is what Sidious wanted. As a Sith Lord, it was his job to diminish Anakin as much as possible, and that is what he was doing, prying at everything that made Anakin feel insignificant, pushing him further into the darkness. Anakin, filled with rage, reached up, attempting to grab Sidious's throat and choke him for treating him like a pawn, but Sidious saw this coming from a mile away. As he stood up and called Vader a fool for even thinking about betraying him, Sidious shot lightning down at Vader as he said to him,
"You are a disappointment, Vader. Damning the name of Lord is earned, and you've earned nothing but shame. You've been defeated, and now you must learn from your arrogance."
Anakin cried out in pain as electricity covered his entire body. Sidious stood over him, relishing in Skywalker's suffering. He spent 13 years grooming the perfect apprentice, just for him to become a shell of a human being. Sure, he wasn't burned, but in Sidious's mind, this is the worst it could possibly get for Skywalker. Anakin would have died had he fallen in the lava, and to Sidious, that would have been a much better fate, because he wouldn't have had to spare this arrogant student of this. Palpatine finished off a minute of torturing Skywalker, turning his men and demanding they fetch a medical capsule for his student immediately. Sidious stood over Anakin, watching the smoke emit from his body. He again spoke to his apprentice in a demeaning way, saying,
"You have so much more to learn. I can teach you to become a powerful Sith, but you will be subservient to me."
Anakin groaned in pain as he watched the clones come back over the top of the hill. They picked him up and placed him on the medical capsule and took him back to the shuttle, as Sidious followed the two clones. Sidious asked if the Jedi were able to escape, to which the other clones told him that the ship had gotten too far off the planet before they could do anything about it. Sidious growled and returned into the vessel, waiting for the ship to take them back to Coruscant so that Vader could be fixed up. Sidious sat quietly, thinking about everything he could do to torture Vader. Sidious was an expert master of the dark side, and he knew he would have no issue breaking Skywalker into the perfect student of the dark. But he would make Anakin weaker for his failure to beat Kenobi. The way Sidious should do this is replace all of Vader's missing limbs with metallic limbs that would send terrible shocks of pain to his neurons if Sidious had to discipline his student. which he assumed he would have to. Anakin on the other side of the room was having a completely different array of thoughts. He was coming down from his crazed mind. He was still undoubtedly pissed off. He had every reason to be too. There was a multitude of reasons for him to be pissed off. He was lied to about being this magnificent force wielder, but at the same time he was bested by someone who he considered weaker than him. His arrogance made him look like a fool, and his trust in Sidious made him look like an even bigger fool. Anakin's mind ran rampant because the most concerning thing to him was whether or not his wife was alright. In a clear mindset, Anakin would have simply come to, yeah, she'd be fine with Obi-Wan, because, he loved a woman who he lost previously. There would be no issue there. But since Anakin still was clearly a maniac in the making, he wasn't thinking that Obi-Wan and his wife had his back. Anakin's crazed emotions got the best of him, and his wonder of what happened to his wife hit him across the face. Skywalker sat in silence with 1,000 thoughts running by his head. Anakin's next conclusion was that he made the wrong choice. Being on Mustafar allowed Anakin to almost believe he had done right. Sure, he had issues with the Jedi, but what he did was too far. Anakin didn't care for the Jedi or the Sith, he just cared for his wife, and here he was aligned with the Sith, while his wife was off with the Jedi instead of him. All the regret of the last several hours mounted up inside of his heart. Skywalker thought about what he had done inside the Jedi Temple, all the way to choking Padme. Anakin even came to the thought of how his actions likely caused Ahsoka to be killed in Order 66. In his mind, as well as he trained her, there was no feasible way for her to survive Captain Rex and the other half of the 501st on Mandalore in the middle of a battle zone. If Anakin had made the right decision, then surely Padme would be by his side, but she wasn't. Anakin looked over at Sidious, whose evil glare stared down Skywalker until he looked away. Sidious grinned, knowing that he was inside of Anakin's mind. There was no escaping him, because he was too powerful even for Skywalker. And in a sick way, that's what Sidious wanted. He wanted to be more powerful than the chosen one of the galaxy, and to bend him to his rule. Because just like everyone else, Skywalker was a pawn of Sidious's. Sidious was a king on the board, and everyone else in his mind was a pawn. That's exactly how he wanted it. Sure, Skywalker was the end goal apprentice for the Dark Lord, but it didn't mean his role wasn't to be subservient to him, because in reality, Palpatine would exploit his new apprentice until his usefulness wore its course. And at the moment, even Sidious wondered if having Skywalker would be more useful than not having him. Not that Skywalker wouldn't be a powerful ally, but even Sidious could feel the tension within Skywalker. He wouldn't just abandon the Jedi for enslaving him, just to be enslaved by the Sith. Even Anakin was smart enough to see the similarities. Surely Sidious was smart about everything, though. He knew he had value inside of Anakin's mind, and as long as he continued to perpetuate the fact that he had value, Skywalker would be his. On the other side of the vessel, Anakin began to ponder what would have happened if he made different choices. These different choices led to numerous outcomes, all of which played out inside of his mind as he lay there dormant. He was weak, and he was unable to do anything, so what better to do than simply waste away in one's own mind? A lot of Anakin's what-ifs came back to the Senate office, where he cut off Mace Windu's hand. If Windu killed Palpatine, he would still be on Coruscant, with Windu, and eventually with Padme. It was a much better fate than this. Even a step further, if he had cut off Windu's hand but still killed Sidious, he would at least have the benefit of blaming the Jedi for Palpatine's death, and by happenstance, walked in on an incident. Again, leaving him free to be with Padme. Or when he entered the temple, he didn't have to kill everyone. He could have ordered the clones to not do that, and he wouldn't have ended up at the bottom of a lava bank. What if on Mustafar he didn't choke Padme, or even at the very least had a conversation with Obi-Wan instead of fighting him and going off about delusions of grandeur? Both Obi-Wan and Anakin surely would have been able to beat Sidious alone, but now that was gone, and now Kenobi would likely never want to do anything with him, because, well, he tried to kill him in an epic duel. I mean, he really beat up on Obi-Wan, and here he was, missing the rest of his limbs, sitting across from someone who electrocuted him for standing up for himself. This entire process, while inherently negative, really put a new perspective on everything for Anakin. Part of Skywalker feared what would happen to him if he returned to the light. After all, he committed a genocide on a religious group. Though, in all fairness, he would likely be spared because all he was doing was following orders from Sidious. Orders that the rest of the Senate seemingly had no issue with him doing when crowned emperor. Skywalker thought about what he would do when they returned to Coruscant, and he got all of his new limbs. He didn't have a lightsaber, and it seemed like Sidious was carrying none of his own. So it would be a match of the Force, to which, as far as Anakin knew, Sidious had a little bit of an advantage. Anakin felt possessed to kill Palpatine, so that he could find Padme and his child. That was the topmost priority in his mind, and if he could do that, then he could kill whoever got in his way of doing so. And at the moment, it looked like the one person in his way was Palpatine. So for the rest of the trip, Skywalker began concocting this plan that would free him from this trap of the Sith. It would allow him to see his wife, and it would also give him the ability to be free from the suffering. On the other side of the galaxy, Padme, with her friend Obi-Wan Kenobi by her side, would give a healthy birth to a boy and a girl. Though after the birthing process, Padme would find herself awake enough to ask Obi-Wan about her husband.
Is Anakin all right?
I don't know. I had to leave before Palpatine landed. I'm so sorry.
It's not your fault, Obi-Wan. I know you would have done anything for Anakin.
That may be true, but I failed him as his master and as his friend.
Say that. Do not, Obi-Wan. Work in mysterious ways the Force does.
I believe that, Master Yoda, but I still feel uneasy. He should have been here with her and the children.
You're right. He should have been. But that doesn't put the blame on you, rather on him.
What should we do then?
I think we should take the children to Alderaan. They'll be safe there. And then we return to the Senate and get rid of Palpatine.
Too dangerous, that is. The Sith are everywhere now.
I concur. It's not safe for you there.
You can disagree all you want, but it was my husband who destroyed the Jedi Order. He needs to pay, just as much as Palpatine does.
Seek revenge. We do not.
I don't care if you don't seek revenge. I brought 2 children into this galaxy, and I won't let them be born into oppression. Come with me or don't, I'm still going.
While there was still an inkling of hope within Padme that believed that there was still good in Anakin, she was a mother now, and the truth is, no one gets between a mother and her babies, even a husband she loved. As far as she was concerned, the megalomaniac that killed the children inside of the temple could very easily do the same to her children. Padme was never one for standing back and allowing injustice to run rampant across the galaxy. If there was a will, there was a way. She watched the Republic cripple itself into an empire, and she wouldn't simply stand by and allow the empire to become an oppressive force in the galaxy. Padme rarely agreed with Palpatine's policies, and after learning that he was a Sith Lord, she believed that he needed to be stopped, because if he wasn't, his lack of morals would throw the galaxy into a depression. There would be nothing that they could do to defend themselves from his tyranny, and that alone was a nightmare. On Coruscant, Anakin groaned in pain as he had 3 new ligaments attached to him. Without his knowledge, these ligaments would be the beginning of his true suffering. Once the limbs were attached, Palpatine told his student to rise. Currently, they stood inside of Palpatine's lair in the industrial sector. Anakin's wounds weren't bad enough for a top-level medical facility. Just some new limbs to be attached, nothing too serious. Anakin hobbled to his feet, and then Palpatine told his student to kneel. Anakin looked through his eyebrows at Palpatine as he got a grasp of his standing. Sidious saw this and subtly said under his breath to Skywalker to stand down. Anakin started rotating his metallic hands. He looked around the room, clenching his metallic fists as he looked up to Sidious, who didn't budge. The Dark Lord of the Sith wasn't one to just threaten, and he certainly wasn't someone you could just actively get away with threatening, because he had no mercy and neither did the dark side. If Anakin wanted to play this little game of foolishness, Palpatine certainly wouldn't have an issue with teaching him about challenging his master. Palpatine, again, had no issue with using Skywalker for experiments. His power in the Force was raw and untapped. Plus, he'd prefer his 13 years of grooming to be put to good use at some way, shape, or form. But if it wasn't, then so be it. Skywalker would make a fine experiment in Mount Tantus all the way on Wayland. It was simply up to Skywalker if he wanted to play this game with him. Anakin stuttered on his feet as he took a step forward and fell to his knees. Sidious grinned, reminding Anakin that while it wasn't his choice, it was the only choice he ever had from here on out. There would be no challenging him because he was the one true Sith. Anakin jumped from the ground towards Sidious, but before he even got to his second foot, electricity was flying out of Palpatine's hands, and lightning crushed Anakin as it covered his body. Skywalker fell back and wallowed in the pain. This was so much worse than the electricity on Mustafar. Palpatine grinned as the lightning showered his apprentice.
Remember your place, Vader. You will never stand up against me.
Anakin looked to the ground as he coughed up blood. His pain receptors were shot from the metallic limbs. While Anakin wasn't wearing a full-body suit, Sidious made a point to emphasize on the amount of pain that the different pieces of metal would cause him. Each limb would shoot 10 times the amount of pain that electricity caused him into his body. It was completely intentional because while on the outside only Skywalker's body would be hurt, the internal pain would feel like the fires of Mustafar, and that's what Sidious wanted Skywalker to feel. He wanted Skywalker to feel that his insides were falling apart on him and that he couldn't defend himself from Sidious. In this instant moment, Anakin felt hopeless. A rush of memories flew into his mind as tears fell from his eyes. He would never see his wife or his children again. He would never be able to apologize to Obi-Wan for taking everything he had left away. He would never be able to properly memorialize Ahsoka for likely losing her life to the clones, again, as far as Anakin assumed. Skywalker returned to a place he hadn't been in 13 years. He felt like he was a little boy inside of Watto's shop. And while Watto hadn't done this to Skywalker, Anakin realized the irony of everything. He ran away from his home of the last 13 years, the people he lived with, for the word of a single man. There were many reasons to not trust the Sith, or the Jedi, but it was irony painted across his face now. Anakin turned around and looked at Sidious from the ground. All he saw were the glowing eyes of his master and nothing else. It was truly demonic. Anakin moved to stand up, but before he could, electricity covered his back as he cried out in pain again. Sidious told Skywalker to get back down. He wasn't finished yet, telling Anakin that he could feel the thoughts of treachery.
The Jedi won't take you back. You betrayed them, destroyed their order, and killed the next generation.
Anakin laid on the ground, crying for mercy as Sidious told him that there was no mercy on the dark side of the Force. He shot more lightning into Anakin's back, and then stopped. Anakin lay on the ground with smoke rising above his outfit, lines of electricity scarring across his body. It was only temporary, but it hurt, and it was as tender as a bruise. Anakin looked at Sidious from the ground as his master told him that he would call upon him when he was needed. Otherwise, he would have to stay here inside of the lair and think about his failures. Sidious had a mess to pick up. Sidious was going to return to the Senate building and continue executing his plan for galactic domination. Everything he had planned on building for his future had to be laid out. Firstly, he was going to be bringing Tarkin back from Kamino and talking to the many other Imperial officers, all of which would begin the next steps of building his galactic empire. On Alderaan, Padme dropped off her children with Breha Organa in her palace, and with Bail and the other two Jedi, they departed back for Coruscant. The Jedi were trying to figure out what the plan was. Padme simply told them that the plan was simple.
Bail and I will go to the Senate and try and rally support for restoring the Republic. We'll host an emergency session, and during that session, you two will be able to get the information needed to turn the Empire against Palpatine.
Obi-Wan and Yoda looked at each other. Both of them knew Padme well enough to not get in her way when she had a plan, something ironically that two Jedi knew better than her husband. Regardless, they traveled back to Coruscant, all knowing that Palpatine would have them on his radar. When they arrived on Coruscant, they landed down on the Senate building. Both Yoda and Obi-Wan stayed hidden within the Senate vessel, knowing that none of the clones would be permitted to board, at least as far as they knew. They weren't allowed to do so during the era of the Republic at the very least. Likely things hadn't changed all that fast. But when Palpatine learned that the ship had landed, he demanded it to be searched. Padme and Bail Organa got into the building this time and started rallying individuals together to start discussion with them about everything that they had discovered. Though without hard evidence, it was hard to prove that Palpatine was behind everything. Even worse, the galaxy was no longer at war anymore. It's not like a unified government could throw Palpatine out of power, especially when he could likely turn the Grand Army of the Republic against the Senate without any repercussions. Senators who opposed Palpatine feared him because their voices meant nothing to him in the power that he created, and they knew it. While they certainly had the voice to speak, the warmongering senators in favor of Palpatine wouldn't budge. They needed concrete evidence, to which Padme told them that they would have the evidence due in due time. They just needed to trust them. But the issue is, this required more than just trust. It required everything to prove Palpatine guilty, because if they didn't have that evidence, then these senators wouldn't join Padme and Bail. At the same time, Palpatine ordered his little pawn to come over to the Senate building to make sure there were no Jedi present. If he saw Jedi, he was ordered to kill them. Anakin asked how he could do that if he didn't have a lightsaber, to which Sidious told him that he would have to find a way, especially to prove his loyalty to the way of the Sith once again. It was the only feasible way for Skywalker to garner acceptance from Sidious, plus he would need a Jedi's crystal to bleed a lightsaber. Anakin got up and departed from the industrial sector of the planet and made his way over towards the Senate building. On the Senate landing platforms, Obi-Wan and Yoda leapt out of the landing gear and made their way towards the building itself. Yoda could feel the darkness of Sidious. It almost made him even fear facing the Dark Lord again. The two Jedi jumped down the side of the landing platform to a lower level and snuck in through a ventilation shaft. At the same time, Skywalker was landing his vessel on the landing platform when he saw Padme's ship. His heart jumped with joy. She was back. She was alive. He jumped out of his ship and ran towards her office, completely forgetting about Palpatine requesting his presence to the Senate building. Sidious could feel this and he exactly wasn't that happy about it. Padme was in her office with the other senators when Anakin ran around the corner and opened the door. Padme looked up and glared at him. Anakin's eyes met hers, and the joy that was on his face vanished in a millisecond. Padme stood up and pointed at Anakin.
Get out of here, Anakin. Read the room. This is because of your actions. I don't want to get to know this new you, let alone see him. Go away.
Anakin stepped back as the door shut and the sound of a door locking echoed throughout the halls. Padme could remotely lock the door and close it herself from the desk in her room, and she made a point to do so to send a message to Skywalker. Did she believe there was still good in him? Yes. But did she love the man that he became? Definitely not. She loved the man that he was, and she, as a mother, sure as hell wouldn't be letting that monster anywhere near her babies. Plus, Padme was working, and she took her work very seriously, especially when it came to restoring a government that would protect the people of the galaxy from oppression. Anakin got a call on his comlink. It was Palpatine, and he was pissed. He aggressively asked why he hadn't come to the office when he was directed to do so. Anakin apologized and started making his way towards the office. When Anakin arrived in the office, he immediately got to his knees. He knew there would be no point in trying to fight this. Sidious had asserted his power over Skywalker, and there was next to nothing for Anakin to do about it. Sidious didn't care. He rose from his desk, demanding his guards to leave the room. They slowly walked out of the room as Sidious paced around his desk, telling Skywalker that no one just disobeys his orders. He was the one and only true Sith Lord. There was no one to rule but him. If anyone had a problem with that, then they would suffer his wrath. Skywalker tried to apologize once more, but interrupting Palpatine wasn't exactly his best decision today, because the second the words left Skywalker's mouth, he was electrocuted by lightning. The pain covered his body once more as Anakin fell lower to the ground, though this time his anger got to him. His body may have been burning from the inside out, but he wasn't going to allow himself to be belittled like this. He started climbing up, but the movement only enraged Sidious as he shot more lightning onto the back of Skywalker, using more power and anger. Anakin fell lower to the ground. He looked down and then tears fell from his eyes. Sidious stopped, telling Anakin,
It's a shame you failed. You could have been the greatest apprentice, but instead you're nothing but a waste.
Anakin tried to stand up. His body was shaking. He couldn't move, and he couldn't control it. The amount of trauma his body had been through had uncontrollable effects on his body. Skywalker looked at Sidious as the Sith Lord looked poised to end his life. Anakin closed his eyes and focused. Visions passed through his mind, from his mother to Padme, Obi-Wan, Rex, Ahsoka, the Clone Wars, pain and suffering, but all the happiness at the end of that. The final words that echoed through his mind was what Padme had just said to him. In this singular moment, Anakin knew he lost everyone and everything, but it was his decision to take accountability over his actions, or simply live a life as a pawn. Sidious grinned, but Skywalker raised his metallic hand, and Sidious began drifting towards him. He buried his feet into the floor, but it was of no use to the Sith Lord. Skywalker finally channeled the full power of the Force itself, and pulled Sidious towards his grip. Sidious felt this and shot lightning at Anakin, and as the lightning coursed across Skywalker's body, he didn't budge. It killed him. It pained everything within him, but he wasn't going to be a slave. He wasn't going to be a prisoner to the dark side. Sidious used all of his power to try and stop Skywalker, but nothing could compete with Skywalker's power. While this was happening, the two Jedi Masters watched Anakin bring his former master into his hands, and he wrapped his metal hand around the neck of Sidious and clenched his fist, cracking the neck, killing him instantly. Sidious dropped to the floor, and Skywalker fell backwards. Dozens of clone troopers led by Commander Fox came around the corner after hearing the commotion, and they promptly arrested Anakin Skywalker for murdering the Emperor of the Galactic Empire. While this certainly would be redeeming for him, it wouldn't be an excuse of what he had done. The Jedi would leave Coruscant and allow the authorities to handle everything. Padme would be separated from her children for a brief period of time until the Senate came to a conclusion on what it would become.
Anakin Skywalker would be locked away for his crimes against the Republic and the Empire for the rest of his life. The Jedi would be given the opportunity to rebuild, and after restoring the government, Padme would raise her children on Naboo. In the future, it would be up to her children if they wanted to visit their father in prison or not.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jonathan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Barth Cheesy, Amala, Manman Studios, Anakin003, Lemon Knight, Flynn Van Seas, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Hit 2,000 likes for this video. If you want to see what's next, I don't know what it is, but it is. Check out the Twitch community Discord and Patreon. Other things are all listed below. The merch store, all that stuff. Otherwise, let's talk about our story. I know what I'm gonna get. This isn't Dexter. It's not Dexter. This isn't some feel-good serial killer story. Get the hell out of here. This is like, let's be real here. Anakin has to have consequences. Like you know, I know he's the main character. I know he's the main character. I know everyone loves him. I love him too. But there are consequences. You know, you can't just. Like, you just can't be a psychopath and murder people and get away with it. And, you know, I think people underestimate that. I know everyone wants to have the happy ending or that full dark side ending, and I was originally going to go really dark with this, but it just didn't flow naturally when I was writing it. And because it didn't flow naturally, I didn't put it in. And so the way that this story ended up going was a more neutral way. You know, the Jedi kind of are able to recover, but Anakin doesn't get the happy ending because he actually has to come to terms with what he did. And that's kind of the main thing that happens at the end of the story here, is that Anakin comes to terms with what he had done. You know, it's not like he's like, it's not like, again, that's feel-good story. It's not like Dexter. Like, it's not like you're gonna have this feel-good serial killer, like, oh, he only kills the bad guy. It's like, no, he just like, he murdered, like, thousands of people. Like, you just don't do that and get away with it. And so the irony of it is that, like, while he killed all the Jedi, that was legal when he did it. Technically speaking, he was just following orders. You know, he was just, you know, as a member of the Grand Army of the Republic, I suppose, he was just following orders like the clones were. And so him killing the Jedi isn't the big deal, but him killing Sidious is what actually gets him thrown in jail. And so that's kind of the irony of it. And yeah, so anyways, something for Padme, and I know I've kind of played with this topic a little bit where Padme goes either way, and I usually have Padme be a little bit more friendly to Anakin in the situation, but this time, you know, I feel like Padme, after giving birth, isn't just going to be like, oh yeah, I love you. It's like, no, I have children, and they become priority over you now because children, and so that's like the mother instinct kicking in, and so her motherly instincts are going to say like, yeah, you're kind of sus, you know, I saw Skywalker vent, get out of here, you know. And so that's what's gonna happen. I think Anakin would be put to jail for the rest of his life, and I don't think he would get out. And that last part that Admiral Yularen said for me, you know, that lets you have lets you have your own imagination with it, and that's always something I like for you guys to have, is ending a story off and allowing you guys to have your own imagination and kind of like take the story wherever you want it to go in your own mind, kind of the way that George did with all of his stories. Like, you know, he allows your mind to have imagination between movies. You know, what happens between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, what happens between A New Hope and Empire. You know, it lets your imagination kind of have fun, and all the adventures that your favorite characters can go on, even after Return of the Jedi and between Force Awakens and Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, whatever, which have you. You know, and so that's kind of what I want to have here. Is like, I finished the story off, and I want you guys to have like this moment to kind of like be like, oh well, you know, maybe Luke and Leia do go and visit their dad. Maybe try and get to know their dad. By that time, you know, he's actually come to learn, like, you know, maybe I shouldn't just kill people for no reason, and actually like think things through and actually listen to people that have, you know, maybe a little bit more, you know, sensibility than me. And so, you know, something like that could happen in the future, but, you know, that's up for you to decide. Otherwise, I hope you all enjoyed this. It was a fun video to do. You know, I love doing these videos, and videos that are kind of like based around Revenge of the Sith, because they always challenge me to do a little bit more. You know, videos based around Revenge of the Sith always seem really similar, and so doing videos based around Revenge of the Sith challenges me to be like a better writer, because like I feel like everyone writes around Revenge of the Sith. I feel like most other creators that do what ifs and the Star Wars community do like based around Revenge of the Sith, at least based on their titles. And so based on their titles, it's like, well, let me try and give the most unique story possible. And so that's what I try to give. So I hope this was unique. I hope you all enjoyed it as always. Anyways, I love you all. Spread the love. And always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.